Your D&D campaign is not a novel, so let's stop writing it like it is one. Howdy everyone, welcome back to Nashcraft with me, Brady. Today, I'll be offloading some thoughts I have as far as the culture and expectations around creating campaigns for tabletop role-playing games, maybe more specifically in the D&D fantasy realm, no pun intended. And I guess where some of this thought comes from is sometime last summer I was talking to an older gentleman who I was telling about my endeavors on Start Playing and trying to publish my own RPG content, and he went into this long spiel about this idea for a campaign he had, and it was this epic overarching story about conflict with storm giants, I believe it was, and other giant races and all this sort of stuff, and all these moving parts and almost Shakespearean drama of backstabbings and inner workings and machinations. And he was going through this whole story of the background to this campaign that he had, and he would say things like, then the players will do this, and then the players will do that, and then they'll discover this, and then they'll see this. And it became so apparent to me in that moment that what he was telling me was not a campaign he wanted to write, because it seemed like there was no real player agency to had, because all of the beat points were so well conceived to him that there was no other way to affect or change it, really. And what he was really describing was a book that he really wanted to write. I think it would have worked and come across much clearer to me if he had sort of pitched it in a book form or a novel form. But as far as the D&D campaign, I found it incomprehensible. I found it railroady, if we want to use that nasty term. And when we say that, we mean to say that there is no player agency, that there are no player action ramifications or actual response from the game world. And a novel is much more of a solitary solo effort, where when we partake in a group, I'm not talking about solo TTRPG, but I'm talking about when we play role-playing games with our friends, it is so much more of a social interaction, and relying on people's interpretations and input to a campaign is actually what makes it special, not hitting all the pre-established beat points of the plot that the GM wants to hit. And I think we sort of lose the forest for the trees, and if I could maybe try to provide some more examples about where my mind's going with this, I think that we all think of something like Lord of the Rings as a very influential, very seminal piece of work as far as fantasy goes, and establishing the tropes within the D&D or RPG fantasy sphere, right? And what does Tolkien get a lot of love for is his world building, is that it seems so well realized, and all the languages he curated, and how that all feeds into the cultures of the peoples and the elves and the dwarves and et cetera, et cetera. But as I've sort of pointed out on another channel that I do Shakespeare research for, is that Tolkien is a philologist, and he literally said that that's all he was doing for fun since he was like a little kid. So of course, that part of that world building is going to be more well realized for him, because that's literally what he did professionally, as well as for his hobby. So I think that we start to think that the world building itself is so necessary because it's in all the great works. And so, well, he did it this way, so that's what's going to make it really impactful. And people like Brandon Sanderson kind of bother me in their little magic systems and how they have analyzed and systematized all this stuff. And, maybe some people latch onto that. There could be some bonus perks to having a very clearly laid out system like that. But I don't know, it sounds really engineered to me. It doesn't sound quite so organic, maybe in some senses. And so where I was leading with this is that when we get into building our campaign worlds, we get too heavily bogged down with building the campaign world, right? Where we have all these big epic plot points we want to hit, and these fascinating bad guys that we want the players to meet and hear their monologues and stuff. And we can still have that. I'm not saying we shouldn't do any of that, but the methods that we try to get our players to do that stuff is not what we should be doing. We need to somehow let them find their own agency and their own path to those location spots. We're focused too much on the world building and not so much the session building, maybe perhaps. And I think where we need to take less from J.R.R. Tolkien and the world building fetish I think we need to start looking more at people like Robert E. Howard and the stories of Conan the Barbarian, and why every single Conan story is high octane, exhilarating, full of experience, full of memory, full of tempo. There's momentum in these stories that actually gets you to the end of something, and that you still feel satisfied in as far as completing a little story here, as I've sort of mentioned in my short story RPG inspiration video. Conan is also much smaller in scope. Yes, there are still evil sorcerers, but they're controlling maybe a town, or maybe at the most powerful ones, maybe sometimes like a larger territory or state, but nothing like the Great Dark Lord Sauron. But it's not the level 20 villain right off the bat. It's much more localized. It's much more accessible, maybe. And Conan's stories are sort of sporadic and episodic and all over the place, because sometimes you'll find him when he's older and maybe he's more of in his king phase, and sometimes he's younger and he's just a thief and he's solo by himself. But these little individual stories, although temporally not all chronological as we were given the stories, they're all stitched together to what we know is to be Conan, and the story somehow has a coherent line that runs through it, despite not being chronologically written or given to us in that fashion. So I think we need to let our players be more like Conan and let him explore different areas and different engagement with their player's character as we progress through this campaign area. So don't try to force your players to get from one town to the next because that's all you have planned for as far as you want to see this particular story beat hit off, to chain react, to necessitate the next one. Just so you can slowly work them towards Mount Doom, rather than letting them decide that, hey, I think we need to do something about Mount Doom, rather than just, slowly trample lamps in through your plot beat points and pre-set up encounters. Maybe some people like that sort of story campaign. I think it's totally viable for some, but I think that we are setting up the expectations wrong with players and DMs as far as what to and get out of these games. Because if you're a player expecting to be able to go anywhere, but the GM is only planning for you to go from here to there might be some conflict there. So I think creating smaller localized areas that are more accessible to players and letting them be able to choose this adventure path. And once again, you can still keep your big bad in the world. It's just a matter of how you let your players engage with it instead of forcing them in a certain direction. So I'm using Owlbear Rodeo to show my campaign world map. And as I've expressed in my other West Marches campaign videos, you can seed Big Bad Sauron over here in this spooky looking single volcano. And he could be cooking up some dastardly plans. But his power is maybe sort of still contained to this immediate jungle-like or desert-like area. And you could slowly seed out certain plot elements like massings of orcs and goblins over here in this area, or increase the encounter odds for those types of creatures over here and make them be extra Uruk-hai and with scary white face paint, shapes in the form of skulls on their face or something, right? Something a little extra oomphy to be like, oh wow, these are some super extra evil guys or whatever. And it'll maybe spark some interest about what's actually going on. We've heard some rumors about some kind of like dark warrior, chieftain, sorcerer of some sort. But the campaign still allows your players to choose different areas to go to as they please until maybe they find some reason to investigate that area on their own. But I don't like it when the GM knows that, okay, I want them to be in Gloomhog this session, and then they need to go to the cultist camp the next one, and then they have to go to Emperor Gregor's right after that. But then before they do that, they need to hightail back over here to Myers Keep, and then I have this thing where they're gonna separate, and I want two of them to go here and two of them to go. And so once again, I'm talking about a novel here. I'm creating the story that I want, and not really allowing the players to choose where they would like to go and affect that story themselves. You, the DM, have laid out all the pieces for them to start to intermingling with. But if you don't let them actually do any of that, then you're not really playing D&D anymore, or you're not playing RPGs anymore. You're just working through a pick-your-own novel, but except that you're not really picking your own novel, you're rather just playing the DM's novel. And I hear this sentiment a lot from other D&D YouTubers where they'll say, well, the players are going to throw a curveball at you. The players are not going to always choose what you want them to do or that they're going to choose something wacky. And I think the players are doing that because they're trying to find agency within that story. And I think both parties get upset, the GM and the players get upset when these expectations are not being met during gameplay time. So players might feel constrained and want to, leave this town and go somewhere else, and explore wherever, and the GM will find that irritating because they feel like they've laid out the clues, they've laid out what needs to be taken up on, and sorry, maybe sometimes what you're laying out is just not what the players are wanting. There was another D&D YouTuber where he was sort of worried about his players' engagement, and it was a father, and he's got like some teenage-year-old sons or whatever, and he was talking about how they were not picking up on certain clues that he was laying out, and there was this whole mystery involving missing kids and this and that, and he wanted them to figure out, but I think the players, they just weren't interested. It's not that the story is necessarily always bad. It's just like they didn't like they're feeling kind of aimless. And I think I dropped a comment in the video saying like, "Hey, it sounds like your players want to go into a dungeon. It sounds like they want to level up their character. It sounds like they want to go look for loot and not do this whole Sherlock Holmes mystery that's going on here, where the campaign seems so beholden to figuring this out rather than actually exploring and testing their character's mettle." I think that we become attached to those story beats that we've laid out. Now, once again, this can still be in your campaign. You just have to wait for the players to want to engage with it. They will engage hard with it once they've sunk their teeth into something. But if they're not picking it up, like, you got to start laying down other stuff for them. You can't keep to the story beats that you have in your DM novel. And that's why I like to end with the session of the players telling me where they're going to go. They're definitely going here. They're definitely tackling this. They're definitely visiting here. That way I'm not having to work on the fly all the time and figure out what they're going to do. Because with the West Marches style, what I like so much is that, yes, that is going to be an upfront information about where the party is going to be committed to for that next session. So that way the GM can actually focus and narrow down and provide a meaningful experience in that location where the players chose to go and engage with. That's what makes the magic of role-playing games. So stop writing your DM novel. Go write a novel if you want to, but otherwise, stop writing your campaign in this fashion, because eventually your campaign's going to burn out and no one's going to want to play because they don't have the agency and you're not satisfied with the overall workings of how you expect your campaign to go. And that's what I think. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Check out all my products on DriveThruRPG in case you're playing Shadowdark and need more supplements. And if you're interested in checking out how I run my campaign, check out my Start Playing link down below if you want to help support the channel and come game with me and some amazing players are in my Shadow Marches campaign world. Adios, everyone.